Andrew, what does this ruling mean for Jack Smith's election interference case against Trump, right? There's lots of reaction, but just level set for us.
Sure. Well, small picture. I mean, the big picture, by the way, is the decision in terms of what it means for the presidency and checks and balances. I mean, this could not be a worse decision in terms of our country. But in terms of what it means for the case, one, there will not be a trial before the general election. That's just, there's no way for that to happen. There's too much that would need to happen and too many appeals. Two, there likely will be a hearing that Judge Chutkan has been called on by the Supreme Court to have to decide what is official conduct and what is unofficial conduct. And at that hearing, although I think there'll be lots of disputes about what evidence can be used, a lot of witnesses can be called. So you could have a sort of mini trial. I wrote about this for the New York Times today. And so that is sort of a small silver lining that there may be that vehicle for people to see additional evidence that did not come out during the January 6th hearing. And then whatever Judge Chutkan finds, there are likely to be appeals of that as to whether she got her decision correct as to what should be in the official bucket, and therefore it's immune under this case, or what is unofficial and therefore not immune under this case.
Harry, you wrote an op-ed for the LA Times saying that this ruling makes it anyone's guess whether Trump, not just before the election, but will ever face accountability in this case. How does today's decision compare with what you expected to see?
It's somewhat more far-reaching, and in particular, to that point, it just lops off big chunks of the indictment, and it's not at all clear that we have no sort of concrete guidance that obviously saves any part of the indictment. Trump has an argument to make in any context. The point that Andrew just raised, he will fight tooth and nail and say you can't even put on evidence because I would be immune here. And they are really cryptic, but it's quite clear if he's acting in a way that can somehow be classified as part of core powers, he's immune, and immune for a really, I would say, pernicious reason. They cannot look into his motive, which is the core, I think, of what we think he did wrong and the soul of the criminal law. It doesn't matter why he uses powers, and that really does make him tantamount to a king.
Core powers. All right, guys, you know, whatever the case may be, I'm always going to try to connect it to money and power. So I want to talk the business impact, because now Donald Trump has an even more wide open lane, if he were to be president again, to mix his personal business interests with a possible official government role. If you remember, early in his presidency, he claimed there could be no conflicts of interest for a president. And then he steamrolled through his 4 years with the Trump Hotel in D.C., events at Doral, events at Mar-a-Lago, all different lobbyist groups, foreign governments, booking up rooms, basically soft bribing him with paying his businesses. We saw Ivanka get Chinese trademarks, and of course, Jared raising money from the Saudis. It infuriated people. They talked about the emoluments clause, yet nothing happened. And now he is going to have an even easier time if he were to be president again. Susan, the irony of all of this, it's reported today that the Trump family just inked a deal for Trump Tower, Saudi Arabia.
But of course they did, Steph. Look, it's a breathtaking decision, and you can only imagine that Donald Trump, he is a maximizer. He will seek to push the limits, whatever the limits are. And now the Supreme Court has basically said there are practically no limits whatsoever. Of course, he's going to claim that basically any conduct that he engages in is ipso facto official conduct, and therefore he can do whatever he wants. I think your point is a really important one, that already Trump pushed the boundaries. Other presidents abided by the rules that apply to other federal employees. They divested themselves of their private business investments. They tried to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Donald Trump was the first president to say, no, I'm not going to do that. He did not sell his business or otherwise put it into a blind trust. He refused to do that. And other family members followed suit. I would remind you that Saudi Arabia, Jared Kushner was in the Middle East on January 6th contradicts itself, flying back from meetings in the Middle East where he was working to set up his future $2 billion investment fund with funding from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So it's not even new for the Trump family to be engaged in business with the same family that they're trying to use to help influence elections in the United States, to try to influence international diplomacy. It's a morass of conflicts of interest that we would not tolerate in any other federal government employee, except apparently the former president.
It's just bananas, because when Trump was running for re-election, Democrats were arguing, we are not going to let the barn door be open. We're going to change the rules. We're going to tighten them up. And now here we are. They're looser than ever. Andrew, our friend Barb McQuaid said there is some good news in this ruling. No immunity for unofficial acts, along with saying immunity for official acts is only presumptive. And I want to share a bit of what Chuck Rosenberg and Lawrence O'Donnell had to say about it. Watch this.
I don't see anything in here that says the assassination of a political rival is part of a president's core constitutional responsibilities for which he or she would be absolutely immune. The problem, I think, is that much of this is indeterminate, right? That we know certain things are absolutely immune, and we know that purely private conduct is not. And that for those other official acts which are presumptively immune, you have to have a case-by-case factual analysis.
What this is we've created an absolute immunity on one paragraph of the indictment, applying to exactly one paragraph of the indictment. All of the rest of the indictment goes back to Judge Chutkan's courtroom, and she schedules this. This Supreme Court has ordered her to have a hearing about the evidence in the case to determine whether the act in question is an official act, whether it might have some kind of protection or not.
So, Andrew, this is not a total home run for Trump, correct?
It's not a total home run, but I think that those two clips are way too rosy. One, the court has said that there is absolute immunity with respect to what the president does with respect to the Department of Justice. Absolute immunity. The court has also said for official acts, which they do, and by the way, for any core acts of which they say it's very, very broad. It's anything that involves sort of basically take care clause and anything's been assigned directly to and exclusively to the president. Those are absolutely immune. But even for just ordinary official acts, those have this presumptive immunity, and the test for overcoming that is one that seems very high in terms of the state meeting it. And it's important to note that the court did not say that presumptive immunity is it. They said at least presumptive immunity. And from that, I think what you can read is that certain of the justices wanted to go further. And so they left open the door to say that it's at least presumptive, but that doesn't mean that they can't go further later. And it also means that when it comes back, if there is a hearing and Judge Chutkan makes rulings, when it comes back up to the Supreme Court, the court can say, you know what, that's not the right test. These are all official, they're not unofficial, and they're all immune. Now, I think the court doesn't have to reach that now, because if Donald Trump becomes president, this case is going to be gone. It will be gone the moment he takes office. He will just dismiss it. And so they don't have to reach that now, but I think it's way too early for someone to have a rosy view of this case. My view is this is a fundamental change in our country as to the checks and balances on the presidency.
Well, Trump certainly has a rosy view. His immediate fundraising email was titled Total Immunity. And based on this decision, he's now trying to get his sentencing in the New York case postponed and the guilty verdict set aside. Harry, what are the chances that happens?
Well, look, most of the conduct there is pre-presidency, but some of it was after. And can you conceptualize it? That's always the issue. He's signing checks to pay back someone who advanced money to for hush money to a mistress. Man, if anything is unofficial, it sure seems that is. But I do want to agree with Andrew that I think Chuck is, and maybe Lawrence, are being a little rosy here, because this presumption only applies at a second level. At the higher level of quote unquote official actions, if you're within Article 2 powers, you are out of luck, period. So when he is using Navy SEAL 6, he's a commander in chief. When he's doing Saudi Arabia deals, he's doing foreign policy. If he can place it in that category of Article 2, game over, period.
My goodness. Susan, the Washington Post editorial board wrote tonight that this decision invites presidents to push the boundaries. Harry just walked us through how that could happen. What could President Biden do now that this decision's made? He's still in office.
Well, everybody's got a hypothetical because we're in a totally brave new world in terms of scenarios. So everything is hypothetical. But President Biden did come out this evening, and I think it's, he tried to make it clear that he would continue to abide by what he sees as the rule of law. And I think that his point about this decision was that it would empower bad actors like the former president, Donald Trump. And, so I don't think in the White House, as much as they might be tempted to right now, they're probably not sitting around drawing up scenarios for using SEAL Team 6 against Donald Trump. That would be my strong presumption at this moment in time. But, we really are in the realm of the unthinkable, aren't we?
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.